May 2nd, 2016. A car breaks down on a quiet German road. Inside, 3 people. A man in his 40s, his wife, and a woman so frail she can barely lift her head. When paramedics arrive, they notice something wrong. The woman's skin hangs loose on her bones. Her eyes are hollow, distant. Burns cover her arms. She weighs 77 pounds. Within hours, she's in intensive care. Within days, she's dead. And within weeks, investigators uncover what happened inside the house she came from. A place where love letters became torture chambers, where promises of forever meant years of hell, and where at least 2 women died behind walls that neighbors passed every single day. This is the story of Wilfried and Angelika Wagener, a couple who turned a farmhouse in Bosseborn, Germany, into a prison. Between 2013 and 2016, they lured vulnerable women through Lonely Hearts ads, offered them hope, then stripped them of everything: their money, their freedom, their dignity, and in some cases, their lives. What happened in that house challenges everything we think we know about human cruelty. Because this was not a sudden explosion of violence. It was methodical, it was deliberate, and it was hidden in plain sight. The village of Bosseborn sits near Höxter in North Rhine-Westphalia, a region known for its rolling hills and timber-framed houses. Fewer than 500 people live there. Everyone knows everyone. Dogs bark at passing strangers. Children ride bicycles down empty roads, the kind of place where people leave their doors unlocked, where gossip travels faster than news, where nothing truly terrible happens. Or so they thought. The landscape around Bosseborn is beautiful in that understated German way. Fields stretch for miles. Forests line the horizons. In autumn, the leaves turn gold and red. In winter, frost coats everything in white. In spring, flowers bloom along the roadsides. In summer, the air smells like cut grass and distant rain. Life moves slowly here. Generations of families have farmed the same land. The local church dates back centuries. Time feels like something that happens elsewhere. Wilfried Wagener lived on the edge of this village in a house that looked tired but unremarkable. Faded paint, overgrown garden, a gravel driveway that crunched when you walked on it, the kind of house you pass without really seeing. He was in his mid-40s, a man with limited education and even fewer prospects. He had worked odd jobs over the years: construction, manual labor, farm work, but nothing ever stuck. He was not successful. He was not charismatic. He was not memorable. Neighbors described him as quiet, awkward, someone who kept to himself. He rarely made eye contact. His voice was soft, almost apologetic. When he went into town for groceries, he moved through the aisles quickly, head down, avoiding conversation. Some people found him strange. Others found him harmless. Most people did not think about him at all. But Wilfried had a history, one that most of the village did not know. In 1995, he was convicted of abusing his first wife. The details were ugly: physical violence, psychological control, threats. He had beaten her repeatedly. He had isolated her from friends and family. He had made her life unbearable. When she finally found the courage to leave and press charges, the court sentenced him to several months in prison. He served his time, got out, and tried to rebuild his life. That rebuilding led him to Angelika. Angelika was a few years younger than Wilfried, plain in appearance, with a voice that rarely rose above a murmur. She had grown up in a difficult household, one marked by neglect and emotional coldness. She learned early that love was conditional, that affection had to be earned through compliance and service. By the time she met Wilfried, she was in her 30s, working occasionally in caregiving roles, living a life that felt small and purposeless. She told people she wanted to be needed, to be loved, to matter to someone. She wanted to feel essential. Wilfried gave her that feeling. He needed her. He depended on her. And in return, she gave him loyalty that bordered on obsession. Their relationship was not violent toward each other, at least not in the traditional sense, but it was deeply dysfunctional. Wilfried was controlling, possessive, prone to dark moods. He would occasionally abuse Angelika when she didn't meet up to his expectations. Along the line, he told her that he was not interested in her anymore, but he didn't want to leave her. She felt grateful and agreed to pretend to be his sister while he entertained other women. Angelika was submissive, eager to please, willing to excuse his worst behaviors. Where he saw control, she saw purpose. Where she saw devotion, he saw submission. They reinforced each other's worst impulses. They enabled each other. They made each other worse. And together, they created something monstrous. It started sometime in 2013. Wilfried began placing ads in newspapers and on dating websites. The ads were simple, almost sweet. A farmer looking for companionship. A man who valued honesty and hard work. Someone who wanted to build a life with the right woman. He wrote about his home, his modest life, his desire for stability. He mentioned that he lived in the countryside, that life was quiet, that he was looking for someone who appreciated simple things. The language was warm, unthreatening. To someone lonely, someone adrift, someone looking for a reason to believe in second chances, these ads were irresistible. Women responded. Some were divorced. Some had lost jobs or struggled with mental health. Some had simply spent too many years alone and wanted to feel wanted again. They wrote back. They shared their stories. They talked about their fears, their hopes, their dreams for the future. And Wilfried replied with patience, kindness, and carefully constructed lies. He told them what they needed to hear. That he understood their pain. That he had been lonely too. That he could offer them safety, stability, a fresh start. The correspondence would last weeks, sometimes months. Letters and emails exchanged, phone calls made late at night. By the time they agreed to visit, they felt they knew him. They felt safe. One woman later told investigators that Wilfried had seemed like an answer to prayer. She had been struggling financially, emotionally adrift after a bad breakup. When she read his ad, she felt a spark of hope. When they spoke on the phone, he listened, really listened. He asked about her day, her interests, her favorite foods. He made her laugh. He made her feel seen. When he invited her to visit, she said yes without hesitation. She thought she was going to meet her future. Instead, she was walking into a nightmare. When women arrived at the Bossaborn house, the illusion held for a while. Wilfried was polite. Angelika smiled. The house was messy but livable. There were home-cooked meals, conversations about the future, promises of partnership. Angelika often played the role of welcoming hostess, showing the new arrival around, explaining how things worked. She would say things like, "We're so glad you're here," and "We've been looking forward to meeting you." But slowly, the atmosphere changed. The first signs were small. A comment about how the woman should dress. A suggestion that she stay inside rather than go to town. A rule about when she could use the phone. These were framed as preferences, as quirks of country living, as compromises that came with sharing a home. "We like to keep things private here," Wilfried would say. "People in the village can be judgmental." Or Angelika would explain, "It's better if we keep to ourselves. You'll understand once you've been here a while." Most women brushed these comments off. They wanted to make things work. They had traveled all this way. They had invested hope and emotion into this relationship. Surely these were just adjustments, growing pains, normal parts of building a life with someone new. Then the restrictions tightened. Doors began to lock from the outside. Phones disappeared. "I'll keep it safe for you," Angelika would say, taking a woman's cell phone. "We don't need distractions right now." Keys vanished. The car was always unavailable. "We need it for errands," Wilfried would explain when asked. The couple's tone shifted from friendly to cold. Smiles became rare. Conversations became interrogations. If a woman questioned the rules, Wilfried would grow quiet and tense. His jaw would tighten. His hands would clench. Angelika would step in, her voice soothing but firm. "He has a temper," she would whisper. "It's better not to upset him. Just do what he says and everything will be fine." The fear started small, a knot in the stomach, a sense that something was wrong but nothing you could quite name. But the fear grew, because the rules kept multiplying. Wake up at a certain time, eat only what was provided. Clean the house to specific standards. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not look out the windows. Do not ask about leaving. Before long, the woman would be sleeping in a locked room. She would be given chores, cleaning, cooking, sometimes caring for Wilfried and Angelika, as though they were employers rather than partners. The relationship that had been promised evaporated. The companionship disappeared. What remained was labor, obedience, and fear. If she resisted, the punishments began. The punishments were not spontaneous. They were calculated. Wilfried and Angelika worked as a team, each playing a specific role. Angelika often initiated the abuse. She would find fault with the woman's work. You didn't clean this properly. You're lazy. You're disrespectful. You don't appreciate what we're doing for you. Her voice would rise, sharp and accusatory. She would circle the woman, pointing out flaws, real or imagined. Then Wilfried would escalate. Sometimes he used his fists, punches to the stomach, slaps to the face, kicks when the woman was on the ground. Sometimes he used objects, belts, sticks, electric cords. He would strike with deliberate force, enough to hurt but not to leave marks that would be immediately visible. He knew what he was doing. He had practice. Sometimes he withheld food for days. The women would be given water, barely, but no meals. Their stomachs would cramp. Their heads would spin. They would beg, plead, promise to do better. And when food finally came, it would be scraps. Stale bread, cold soup. Enough to keep them alive, but not enough to give them strength. Sometimes he forced the women to stand for hours, or locked them in cold rooms without blankets, or burned them with scalding water. He would heat water on the stove until it was nearly boiling, then pour it over their arms, their backs, their legs. The women would scream. Angelika would watch, sometimes impassive, sometimes smiling. The electric shocks were among the worst. Wilfried would use modified electrical cords, touching them to sensitive areas, necks, hands, feet. The pain was blinding, immediate. The women would collapse, shaking, unable to speak. And when they recovered, they would be told that this was their fault, that they had brought this on themselves, that if they just obeyed, the pain would stop. But the pain never stopped, because obedience was never enough. No matter what the women did, it was wrong. No matter how hard they tried, they failed. The rules changed constantly. What was acceptable one day was punishable the next. The women could not win. They could only endure. The worst part was the psychological conditioning. Wilfried and Angelika did not just hurt their victims' bodies. They broke their minds. They told them that they deserved the abuse, that they were worthless, stupid, ugly, that no one outside the house would believe them, that their families had abandoned them, that they had nowhere else to go. You think anyone cares about you? Wilfried would snarl. You think anyone's looking for you? They're not. You're nothing. You're mine now. Angelika would add her own venom. You're lucky we took you in. Without us, you'd be on the streets. You'd be dead. This is your home now. You should be grateful. Over time, the women stopped resisting. They stopped hoping. They learned to endure. Some dissociated, their minds retreating to places where pain could not reach. Some became numb, moving through the days like ghosts. Some tried to please their captors, believing that if they just worked hard enough, if they just obeyed perfectly, the abuse would end. It never did. The house became their world, a world with no clocks, no calendars, no sense of time passing. Days blurred together. Seasons changed outside, but inside, everything stayed the same. Cold, dark, oppressive. The walls closed in. The air felt thick. The silence was broken only by the sounds of violence. Screams, thuds, sobbing. Neighbors heard things sometimes. Loud noises, shouting. One woman who lived a few houses down later told reporters that she had heard screams late at night. She had mentioned it to her husband. He had shrugged. "Probably just a fight," he said. "Couples argue." She never called the police. She never checked. She convinced herself it was nothing. Another neighbor saw one of the victims once, briefly. The woman was standing in the yard, thin and pale, her clothes hanging off her frame. The neighbor waved. The woman did not wave back. She just stared, her expression blank. The neighbor found it odd, but did not dwell on it. People are strange sometimes. People have bad days. No one intervened. No one asked questions. No one wanted to believe that something terrible was happening in their quiet village. Between 2013 and 2016, at least 8 women passed through that house. Some stayed weeks, some stayed months. Most eventually escaped or were released when Wilfried and Angelika grew bored or worried about suspicion. These women left broken, traumatized, and often too afraid to report what had happened. One woman, identified in court documents only as Victim A, later described her experience to investigators. She had arrived at the house in early 2014, full of hope. Within days, she realized something was wrong. Within weeks, she was being beaten daily. She was forced to clean constantly, to cook elaborate meals that Wilfried and Angelika would eat, while she was given nothing. She was locked in her room at night. She was not allowed to shower. She was not allowed to contact anyone outside the house. After 6 weeks, she was able to escape. She was so grateful to escape that she did not consider reporting him. She just wanted to forget. She went home, told no one what had happened, and tried to move on. But the nightmares never stopped. The fear never left. When police contacted her in 2016, after the case broke open, she finally told her story. She cried through the entire interview. Another woman, Victim C, stayed for 3 months. She was beaten with such regularity that she lost count of the injuries. Broken ribs, dislocated shoulder, burns on her arms and legs. She tried to escape once, sneaking out while Wilfried was asleep. She made it to the road before Angelika caught her. The punishment for that attempt was the worst beating she had ever endured. She never tried again. When Wilfried finally let her go, he warned her, "If you tell anyone, I'll find you. I'll kill you. No one will believe you anyway." She believed him. She went home and told her family she had been traveling. She hid the scars. She lied about the weight loss. She pretended everything was fine. But inside, she was shattered. These women survived. They carried trauma that would last lifetimes, but they survived. 2 women were not so lucky. If you're finding this story compelling, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. And if you've made it this far, leave a comment saying "still here," so we can see who's following every twist of this case. The first woman to die was Angelika W. She was 33 years old when she responded to one of Wilfried's ads in early 2014. Angelika had been through a difficult divorce. Her marriage had ended badly, and she was struggling to rebuild her life. She had a job, but it was low-paying and unfulfilling. She had a few friends, but she felt disconnected from them. She was lonely in the way that aches, the kind of loneliness that makes you vulnerable to promises. When she read Wilfried's ad, something inside her responded. He sounded genuine. He sounded kind. The letters they exchanged were warm, thoughtful. He asked about her dreams. He told her about his life on the farm. He painted a picture of a simple, peaceful existence. She wanted that. She wanted to believe in it. In March 2014, she visited Bossaborn. Her mother later told investigators that Angelika had called her before the trip, excited and nervous. "I think this might be good," Angelika had said. "I have a good feeling about him." It was the last genuine conversation her mother would have with her daughter. Neighbors in Bossaborn saw Angelika a few times in the spring of 2014. She was thin, quiet, rarely made eye contact. One neighbor, a woman in her 60s, tried to speak with her once. "Are you visiting?" the neighbor asked. Angelika nodded but said nothing. She glanced back at the house, fear flashing across her face. "I have to go," she whispered. She hurried away. The neighbor thought it was strange but did not pursue it. By May, no one saw Angelika anymore. She had vanished. Weeks passed, months. No one asked questions. People assumed she had moved on, that the relationship had not worked out, that she had gone back to wherever she came from. In reality, Angelika was trapped inside the house, enduring daily torture. The abuse was relentless. Beatings, starvation, psychological torment. Wilfried and Angelika worked in tandem, each feeding off the other's cruelty. Angelika seemed to take particular pleasure in humiliating Angelika, mocking her appearance, her worth, her failed marriage. Wilfried delivered the physical punishments, his fists and feet breaking bones, leaving bruises that never had time to heal before new ones appeared. Angelika tried to comply. She tried to be good enough, but nothing worked. The standards were impossible. The abuse was constant, and slowly, her body began to fail. By August 2014, Angelika was dying. She was emaciated, weak, barely able to stand. Her body was covered in injuries. She had infections that were not being treated. She was fading. Angelika would later confess to investigators that Angelika's death came after a particularly brutal session of violence. They had beaten her with such force that her body gave out. She collapsed on the floor. She stopped breathing. They tried to revive her, not out of compassion, but out of fear. If she died, they would have a problem. But she did not wake up. She was gone. And instead of calling for help, instead of facing the consequences of what they had done, Wilfried and Angelika made a decision. They would hide the body. They would pretend she had left. They would erase her. They wrapped her body in plastic and carried it to the basement. They had a freezer there, old and humming. They placed her inside and locked the lid. For weeks, she stayed there, frozen, while they figured out what to do. Finally, they began the process of disposal. They dismembered her body in the basement, piece by piece. The work was gruesome, methodical. Angelika helped. She later told investigators that she felt nothing while doing it. No remorse, no horror. Just a task that needed to be completed. They burned the pieces in the fireplace, a little at a time, over several nights. The smell was terrible, acrid and heavy. Neighbors later said they remembered the smell, that it had been odd, but they had assumed it was trash or something dead in the woods. No one investigated. The bones that would not burn, they crushed. The ashes, they scattered around the property, in the woods, along the roadside. Within months, there was nothing left of Angelika W. except bone fragments too small to identify without advanced forensic analysis. To cover their tracks, they sent text messages from Angelika's phone to her mother. The messages said she was fine, that she had decided to start fresh somewhere new, that she needed space and would be in touch soon. They kept the messages brief, casual. "I'm okay. Don't worry, I just need time." Angelika's mother was confused but not alarmed. Her daughter had always been independent, sometimes impulsive. She assumed this was just another chapter in a complicated life. She responded to the messages with love and encouragement. "Take care of yourself. I'm here if you need me." She had no idea she was texting with her daughter's killers. By the end of 2014, Angelika W. had been erased. Her body was gone. Her phone was destroyed. Her belongings were burned or thrown away. Officially, she was a missing person. Unofficially, she was dead. And Wilfried and Angelika moved on as though nothing had happened. The couple did not stop. If anything, Angelika's death emboldened them. They had gotten away with murder. They had hidden a body in plain sight. They had fooled her family, the neighbors, the authorities. They were invincible. More women came. More ads were placed. The pattern repeated. Some women were released after weeks of abuse. Some escaped. But in late 2015, another woman arrived who would not survive. Her name has not been fully disclosed to the public, but court records refer to her as Victim B. She was in her 40s, isolated, vulnerable. She had responded to one of Wilfried's ads in the autumn of 2015. The correspondence had been brief but promising. When she arrived at the house in November, she expected a new beginning. She stayed for several months. The abuse was even worse than what Angelika had endured. Wilfried and Angelika had refined their methods. They knew how to break someone without leaving visible marks that would raise suspicion. They knew how to extract money, how to isolate their victims completely, how to make them believe that resistance was pointless. Victim B was beaten regularly. She was starved for days at a time. She was forced to sleep on the floor, without blankets, even in the coldest part of winter. She was denied basic hygiene. She was humiliated, degraded, tortured in ways that left her body failing and her mind shattered. By February 2016, she was critically ill. Malnutrition, infection, untreated injuries. Her body was shutting down. She could not eat. She could not walk. She lay on the floor of her locked room, barely conscious, while Wilfried and Angelika debated what to do. They decided to let her die. There was no dramatic moment, no violent climax. She simply faded. One morning she stopped breathing. Wilfried checked for a pulse, found none. And once again, they faced the problem of disposal. Her body was disposed of in the same way as Annika's, frozen, dismembered, burned. Her ashes joined the others in the soil around Bosseborn. Her family received text messages saying she was fine, that she was traveling, that she would be in touch. They believed the lies because they had no reason not to. By the spring of 2016, Wilfried and Angelika had killed 2 women and tortured at least 6 others. They had stolen money, destroyed lives, and committed acts of cruelty that defied comprehension. And they might have continued indefinitely if not for a single moment of bad luck. In April 2016, a woman named Suzanne F. was locked inside the Bosseborn house. She was 41 years old, once vibrant and hopeful. She had arrived weeks earlier, responding to an ad that had seemed sincere. By May, she was barely alive. She weighed 77 pounds. Her hair was falling out. Her skin was covered in burns and bruises. She had infections in multiple wounds. Her organs were beginning to fail. She could not stand without help. She was dying, and Wilfried and Angelika knew it. They panicked. If Suzanne died in the house, it would be their 3rd victim. Disposal would be risky. The pattern would become more obvious. Suspicion might grow. They decided to take a different approach. They would drive her back to her hometown, leave her somewhere public, and let someone else find her. They would claim she had visited and then left on her own, that they had no idea she was sick, that they were just as shocked as anyone. On May 2, 2016, they loaded Suzanne into their car. She was wrapped in a blanket, barely conscious. They placed her in the back seat, her body limp and unresponsive. Angelika sat beside her, occasionally checking to make sure she was still breathing. Wilfried drove, his hands tight on the wheel, his mind racing through the plan. They drove for an hour, then 2. The plan was to take her to a train station in her hometown, leave her on a bench, and drive away. By the time someone found her, they would be long gone. It was callous, but simple. It might work. But the car broke down. It simply stopped running in the middle of nowhere. No warning. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died. Wilfried tried to restart it. Nothing. He tried again. Nothing. He got out, opened the hood, stared at the engine as though looking at it would fix the problem. It did not. Angelika grew frantic. Suzanne was fading fast. Her breathing was shallow. Her pulse was weak. If she died in the car, on the side of the road, with both of them present, there would be no way to explain it. They had no choice. They called for help. When the ambulance arrived, the paramedics immediately knew something was wrong. Suzanne was emaciated, dehydrated, covered in injuries that looked like torture. Her skin was pale, almost gray. Her eyes were sunken. She could not speak coherently. She looked like a prisoner of war. One of the paramedics, a man in his 30s with years of experience, later said it was the worst case of neglect and abuse he had ever seen. He asked Wilfried and Angelika what had happened. They stammered through a story about Suzanne visiting them, getting sick, them trying to take her home. The story made no sense. The injuries did not match. The timeline was wrong. The paramedics called the police. Within hours, officers arrived at the Bossaborn house. They approached cautiously, unsure what they would find. When they knocked on the door, no one answered. They had a warrant. They entered. What they found was worse than they imagined. The house was cold, filthy, oppressive. The air smelled of decay and something chemical, something burned. There were locks on the inside of doors, chains hanging from walls. In one room, they found bloodstains on the floor and walls. In another, they found a bucket that had been used as a toilet. In the basement, they found the freezer, empty but stained. They found scorch marks in the fireplace, marks that forensic analysis would later link to human remains. The officers who entered that house later described it as one of the most disturbing crime scenes they had ever encountered, not because of the violence itself, but because of the deliberateness. Everything had been designed to control, to punish, to dehumanize. Every detail spoke to years of methodical cruelty. One officer, a woman in her 40s with 2 decades on the force, stood in the middle of the main room and felt her stomach turn. She had seen murders, assaults, terrible accidents. But this was different. This was sustained. This was planned. This was evil. Wilfried and Angelika were arrested at the scene. They did not resist. They did not protest. They simply sat in the back of the police car, silent as their world collapsed around them. Suzanne F. was rushed to the hospital in Huckster. Doctors worked desperately to save her. They treated the infections, the dehydration, the malnutrition. They cleaned and bandaged her wounds. They monitored her organ function. But the damage was too severe. Her body had been pushed beyond the point of recovery. Her kidneys were failing. Her liver was failing. Her heart was weak. She died on May 7, 2016, 5 days after being found. She never fully regained consciousness. She never told her story in her own words. She simply slipped away, her body finally giving up after weeks of unimaginable suffering. Her death triggered a full-scale investigation. Police began contacting the other women who had passed through the Bossaborn house. They tracked down names from old ads, from letters, from financial records. Some women were willing to talk, some were not. But slowly, a pattern emerged. The stories were all the same. Ads, false promises, escalating abuse, terror. One woman broke down during her interview, sobbing so hard she could not speak. Another sat stone-faced, recounting every detail in a flat, emotionless voice. Another refused to participate at all, saying only, "I want to forget. Please let me forget." Forensic teams scoured the property. They brought in ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, specialists in bone recovery. They found bone fragments in the fireplace, small pieces that had survived the flames. DNA analysis confirmed they belonged to human remains, though identifying specific individuals proved difficult due to the extent of the burning. They found blood traces in multiple rooms, on walls and floors. Luminol revealed patterns of violence, splatter marks, drag marks, evidence of repeated beatings. They found text messages on old phones, messages sent to families pretending the victims were safe. They found financial records showing that Wilfried and Angelika had stolen thousands of euros from their victims, draining bank accounts and taking credit cards. The investigation confirmed that at least 2 women had been murdered, Annika W. and victim B. It revealed that 8 women in total had been subjected to prolonged torture. It exposed a system of manipulation and violence that had operated for years without detection. The trial began in late 2016 and stretched into 2018. The courtroom was packed every day. Journalists from across Germany and beyond filled the press section. Victims' families sat in the gallery, some crying quietly, some staring at the defendants with expressions of pure hatred. Both defendants blamed each other. Angelika claimed Wilfried had forced her to participate, that she had been afraid of him, that she had acted out of fear for her own life. Her lawyers painted her as a victim herself, a woman trapped in an abusive relationship, manipulated into doing terrible things. Wilfried claimed Angelika had been the instigator, that she had enjoyed the abuse, that she had been worse than him. His lawyers argued that he had mental health issues, that he was not fully responsible for his actions, that psychiatric treatment was more appropriate than prison. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence, testimonies from survivors, each one more harrowing than the last. Forensic reports detailing the extent of the injuries, the burns, the starvation, the torture. Recorded messages and letters showing premeditation and planning. Psychological evaluations revealing that both defendants understood exactly what they were doing and chose to do it anyway. The defense tried to argue diminished capacity, psychological trauma, coercion. None of it mattered. The evidence was too strong. The pattern was too clear. The suffering was too documented. Expert witnesses testified about the psychology of torture, about how prolonged abuse breaks down the human psyche. They explained that what Wilfried and Angelika had done was not impulsive or emotional. It was systematic. They had created a controlled environment, specifically designed to maximize suffering while minimizing the risk of discovery. One psychologist testified that both defendants exhibited traits of sadism, a need to inflict pain for psychological gratification. Another testified that their relationship was mutually reinforcing, that each enabled and encouraged the worst in the other. Thank you for your incredible support. This channel exists because of viewers like you. If you'd like to help us continue bringing you deeply researched, thoughtfully crafted stories like this one, consider joining our YouTube membership. You'll get access to exclusive content, behind-the-scenes updates, and the satisfaction of knowing you're supporting independent storytelling. Your support means everything. In September 2018, the verdicts came. The courtroom fell silent as the judge read the sentences. Angelika Wagoner was sentenced to 13 years in prison for 2 counts of murder, multiple counts of torture, and various other charges. Wilfried Wagoner was sentenced to 11 years in a psychiatric detention facility, deemed too mentally unstable for a regular prison, but fully culpable for his crimes. The sentences sparked immediate outrage. Families of the victims shouted from the gallery, 13 years? 11 years? That's all? One woman collapsed, sobbing. Another screamed at the judge, "They killed my daughter. They tortured her. How is this justice?" Outside the courthouse, protesters gathered. Signs read, "Justice for Annika," and "Never forget." Media vans lined the streets. Reporters interviewed legal experts, psychologists, anyone who could help the public understand how such lenient sentences were possible. The answer lay in German law. There is no death penalty. Life sentences require specific aggravating factors and usually mean 15 to 20 years before parole eligibility. The court had considered the evidence, the defendants' backgrounds, the possibility of rehabilitation. They had imposed what they deemed appropriate within the bounds of the law. But to the families, to the survivors, to the public watching from afar, it felt inadequate. 2 women were dead. 6 others were scarred for life. 13 and 11 years seemed like nothing. Wilfried and Angelika were led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. Neither spoke. Neither showed emotion. They simply walked, heads down, as cameras flashed and voices shouted around them. The Bossaborn house stood empty for years after the arrests. Locals avoided it. Children dared each other to walk past it, then ran away screaming, their imaginations filling in horrors they could not have truly understood. Some people spray-painted messages on the walls, condemnations, prayers, curses. Evil lived here. May they rot in hell. We will never forget. The house became a symbol, a physical manifestation of evil in a place that had once been peaceful. Tourists came to take pictures, morbid curiosity drawing them to the site. The village council debated what to do. Some wanted to preserve it as a memorial. Others wanted it gone, erased, forgotten. In 2022, the house was demolished. The local government decided it was the only way to move forward. Heavy machinery arrived one morning and tore the structure down. Walls crumbled, beams snapped. Within days, the house was rubble. The rubble was hauled away. The land was cleared. Grass was planted. Today, there is no physical trace of what happened there. A small memorial plaque marks the site, a simple stone with the names of the known victims. But otherwise, The land looks like any other empty lot in rural Germany. You would never know that horror once lived here. But the memory remains. The village remembers. The survivors remember. And the families of those who died will never forget. Survivors of Wilfried and Angelika's abuse have struggled to rebuild their lives in ways that outsiders can barely comprehend. The physical wounds healed, eventually. Broken bones knitted back together. Burns faded to scars. Weight was regained. But the psychological damage runs deeper than any X-ray can show. One survivor, speaking anonymously to a German newspaper in 2019, described her life after Bosseborn. She said she cannot sleep in a closed room. She keeps every door in her apartment unlocked and slightly open. She wakes up screaming multiple times a week, convinced she's back in that house. She cannot hold a job because loud noises send her into panic attacks. She cannot maintain relationships because she does not trust anyone, cannot let anyone close. They took everything from me, she said. My dignity, my sense of safety, my ability to believe in basic human goodness. I survived, but sometimes I wonder if that's really living. Another survivor moved to a different country, changed her name, cut ties with everyone who knew her before. She told investigators she needed to become someone new, someone who had never been to Bosseborn, because carrying the memory of who she had been was too heavy. She attends therapy twice a week. She takes medication for PTSD, anxiety, depression. She has made progress, her therapist says. But progress is measured in small victories. A night without nightmares, a week without flashbacks, a month without contemplating suicide. A third survivor has spoken publicly about her experience, hoping to raise awareness about manipulation and coercive control. She gives talks at universities and women's shelters. She has written a book, published under a pseudonym, detailing what happened to her. She says speaking about it helps, that turning her pain into purpose gives her a reason to keep going. But she also admits that there are days when getting out of bed feels impossible, when the weight of memory crushes her. All of them carry the scars of what happened in that house. All of them live with the knowledge that they trusted someone who promised love and received torture. All of them wonder if they will ever truly feel safe again. The families of Annika W. and victim B live with a different kind of pain. They grieve not just the loss of their loved ones, but the manner of that loss, the violence, the cruelty, the disposal of their bodies as though they were garbage, the lies they were told, the text messages that made them believe their daughters were alive and well when they were already dead. Annika's mother gave one interview to a German television station in 2017. She sat in her living room, surrounded by photos of her daughter, Annika as a child, blowing out birthday candles, Annika as a teenager, smiling at the camera, Annika as an adult, hopeful and bright. She spoke slowly, carefully, her voice breaking multiple times. I trusted those messages, she said. I believed my daughter was out there somewhere, finding herself, getting better. I never could have imagined. She stopped, unable to continue. The interviewer waited, respectful. After a long silence, Annika's mother continued. They burned her. They scattered her like trash. I don't even have a body to bury. I don't have a grave to visit. All I have are memories and rage and this emptiness that will never be filled. She has attended therapy. She has joined support groups for families of murder victims. She has tried to move forward. But forward is a direction that feels meaningless when your child is gone. She lights a candle every year on Annika's birthday. She speaks her daughter's name aloud so that someone, somewhere, remembers she existed. The family of victim B has remained largely private, declining most interview requests. What little is known comes from court documents and brief statements through their lawyer. They are devastated. They feel guilt that they did not recognize the signs, did not push harder when the text messages seemed off, did not report her missing sooner. Rationally, they know they could not have known. Emotionally, the guilt remains. The case raised uncomfortable questions about how such crimes could go undetected for so long. How did 8 women vanish without anyone noticing? Why didn't neighbors intervene? Why didn't authorities investigate sooner? The answers are complex and unsatisfying. Some victims were estranged from their families. They had no stable support systems, no regular contact with people who would notice if they disappeared. Their absence did not trigger immediate alarm because absence was already normal for them. Some had told people they were going to visit a man they had met online to potentially start a new life. When they stopped communicating, friends and family assumed things had not worked out and they were embarrassed. She'll reach out when she's ready, people thought. They gave her space. That space became a grave. Some people did notice strange things. Neighbors heard screams. They saw women who looked frightened, who looked thin and haunted. But they convinced themselves it was nothing. Domestic disputes, relationship problems, none of their business. The human capacity for denial, for not wanting to see what is uncomfortable, played directly into Wilfried and Angelika's hands. Authorities came under criticism as well. Some victims had filed missing person reports for women who had passed through Bosseborn, but the reports were not connected. No one drew a pattern. No one thought to look at the house on the edge of the village where a man with a history of violence lived with his wife. The system failed to protect these women because the system was not designed to see patterns until it was too late. After the case broke, German authorities implemented new protocols for tracking missing persons, especially vulnerable adults. Better information sharing between jurisdictions, more thorough follow-up on reports, training for officers on recognizing signs of human trafficking and coercive control. These changes came too late for Annika and Victim B and Suzanne F., but they might save someone else. The Bosseborn case also highlighted the dangers of isolation, both physical and emotional. Wilfried and Angelika targeted women who were vulnerable, who were searching for connection, who were willing to trust strangers because loneliness felt worse than risk. They exploited that desperation. They turned hope into a weapon. Loneliness is an epidemic in the modern world. More people live alone than ever before. Social bonds are weaker. Communities are less connected. People seek companionship online, through dating apps and personal ads, because traditional methods of meeting people have eroded. And predators know this. They know how to craft the perfect profile, how to write the perfect message, how to seem safe when they are anything but. Experts on domestic violence and coercive control point to the Bosseborn case as an extreme example of patterns that exist on a spectrum. Most controlling relationships do not end in murder, but they follow similar progressions: gradual isolation, escalating restrictions, psychological manipulation, physical abuse. The difference is often just a matter of degree. What happened in Bosseborn is not an anomaly, said Dr. Petra Hoffman, a psychologist who specializes in trauma and abuse. It's the logical endpoint of control taken to its most extreme. But the tactics used by Wilfried and Angelika are the same tactics used by abusers everywhere. They isolate their victims. They undermine their self-worth. They make them dependent. They use fear to maintain power. Understanding this case helps us understand abuse more broadly. Wilfried Wagener remains in psychiatric detention as of 2024. He is held in a secure facility in North Rhine-Westphalia, where he receives treatment for various mental health conditions. Reports from the facility describe him as withdrawn, mostly compliant, occasionally violent toward staff. He does not speak about what happened in Bosseborn. He has not expressed remorse. When asked about his victims during psychiatric evaluations, he either remains silent or blames Angelika. Angelika is serving her sentence in a women's prison in Germany. She is eligible for parole in 2031, after serving 13 years. Prison staff describe her as a model inmate, quiet, obedient, helpful. She works in the prison library. She attends therapy sessions. She has, according to her therapist, expressed remorse for what happened, though the sincerity of that remorse is debated. Some psychologists believe she is genuinely grappling with what she did, that time and distance from Wilfried have allowed her to see her actions clearly. Others believe she is simply performing remorse, saying what she knows she should say, because she understands that appearing rehabilitated is her path to eventual freedom. The question of whether either of them can be rehabilitated is one that divides experts. Can someone who tortured and killed, who dismembered bodies and scattered ashes, who sent false messages to grieving mothers. Can that person ever be safe to release back into society? Some argue that with intensive therapy, psychiatric medication, and strict monitoring, even the most damaged individuals can change. Others argue that the capacity for that level of cruelty indicates something fundamentally broken, something that cannot be fixed. The debate is academic for now. Both remain incarcerated. Both will remain so for years. But eventually, parole hearings will come. Decisions will be made, and society will have to wrestle with what justice means when the damage can never be undone. The media coverage of the Bosseborn case was intense and sustained. German newspapers ran front-page stories for months. International outlets picked up the story. Documentaries were made. Books were written. The case became shorthand for a particular kind of evil, banal, domestic, hidden. But the media attention also brought problems. Sensationalism crept in. Details were exaggerated. Victims were turned into characters rather than people. The complexity of the case was reduced to simple narratives: good versus evil, innocence versus depravity. Survivors found their trauma dissected by strangers, their suffering turned into entertainment. One survivor spoke about the pain of seeing her story in tabloids, twisted and distorted for clicks. They made it sound like a horror movie, she said. But it was my life. It was real. And seeing it reduced to headlines and sound bites felt like another violation. Families of the victims expressed similar frustrations. Annika's mother said she stopped reading news articles about the case because they were too painful, too inaccurate, too focused on the perpetrators rather than the victims. My daughter was more than what happened to her, she said. She was kind. She was funny. She loved animals. She wanted to be a teacher. But all anyone talks about is how she died. The Bosseborn case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature. We want to believe that evil announces itself, that monsters look like monsters, that we would recognize danger if we encountered it. But Wilfried and Angelika were not monsters in the Hollywood sense. They were not geniuses or masterminds. They were ordinary people, unremarkable, the kind you pass on the street without noticing. They were damaged, broken individuals who found each other and decided that their pain gave them permission to inflict suffering on others. They built a system of cruelty brick by brick, victim by victim, lie by lie. And they operated for years in a small village where everyone knew everyone, because people did not want to believe that something so terrible could happen so close to home. That broken-down car in May 2016 saved lives. It stopped a cycle that might have claimed more victims. It brought justice to women who had been silenced. And it exposed a truth that many people find difficult to accept, that the most dangerous predators are often the ones who seem the most ordinary. Today, Bosseborn is quiet again. The village has moved on, at least on the surface. The empty lot where the house once stood is just another patch of grass. Children play in nearby yards. People go to work, come home, live their lives. But underneath the normalcy, there is a collective memory, a shared knowledge of what happened here. Some villagers refuse to talk about it. They change the subject when it comes up. They pretend it never happened because acknowledging it means acknowledging that they lived beside horror and did not see it. Others talk about it openly, using the case as a cautionary tale, a reminder to pay attention, to ask questions, to not look away when something seems wrong. The local church holds a memorial service every year on May 7th, the anniversary of Suzanne F's death. It is attended by a few dozen people, some locals, some family members of victims, some survivors who feel strong enough to return. They light candles. They speak the names of the dead. They pray for healing and justice and peace that may never fully come. People forget. Attention moves on. New tragedies replace old ones. But for the survivors, for the families, for the few who truly understand what happened in that house, the memory will never fade. Annika W. was 33 years old. She wanted love. She wanted stability. She wanted to believe that someone could see her value. She died alone, afraid, and in unimaginable pain. Her body was burned and scattered like trash. Her family did not know the truth until years later. She deserved better. She deserved a life. She deserved to be remembered as more than a victim. Victim B was in her 40s. She had survived hardships before. She thought she could survive this too. She was wrong. She died slowly, over weeks, as her body gave out from starvation and abuse. She was disposed of in the same way as Angelika. Her name is still protected by German privacy laws. Her story is still unfolding in the hearts of those who loved her. Suzanne F. was 41. She was the one who got away, but not in the way anyone would hope. She escaped with her life, but only barely, and only because a car broke down at the right moment. She spent her final days in a hospital bed, too weak to speak, too damaged to recover. She died knowing she had been saved, but also knowing she would never truly be free. These women were real. They had lives, dreams, families. They were not statistics. They were not cautionary tales. They were human beings who deserved better than what they got. And their stories matter because they remind us of the cost of looking away, of not asking questions, of letting loneliness and vulnerability become weapons in the hands of predators. The story of Wilfried and Angelika Wagner is not unique. Across the world, predators use similar tactics: isolation, manipulation, coercive control. They find people who are vulnerable, and they exploit them. They hide behind normalcy, behind smiles, behind promises, and they count on the fact that most people do not want to believe that such cruelty exists. But it does exist. It exists in quiet villages and busy cities. It exists behind closed doors and pleasant facades. It exists wherever there are people willing to hurt others and people desperate enough to trust them. The Bossaborn case ended with arrests, trials, and sentences, but it did not end with closure. The survivors will carry their trauma forever. The families of the dead will never have full answers. The village will always have a shadow over its history. And the rest of us are left with a question that has no easy answer. How do we protect the vulnerable without destroying the trust that makes human connection possible? There is no simple solution, but there are lessons. Pay attention to the people around you. Notice when someone disappears. Ask questions when something feels wrong. Believe survivors when they come forward. Support systems that help isolated individuals before predators can reach them. And never assume that cruelty cannot happen just because it has not happened yet. The house in Bossaborn is gone. The couple is in prison. The victims are remembered. But the lessons remain. And the next time you see a Lonely Hearts ad, or meet someone who seems too good to be true, or hear about a person who vanished without explanation, remember what happened in that quiet German village. Remember that trust can be weaponized. Remember that normalcy can be a disguise. And remember that sometimes the only thing standing between safety and horror is luck. Justice was served in the Bossaborn case. But justice does not undo suffering. It does not bring back the dead. It does not erase the years of pain. It simply draws a line and says, this was wrong. This will not be tolerated. This will be punished. And maybe that has to be enough. The legal system did what it could within the constraints of law and precedent. The investigators worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. The prosecutors built a case that left no room for doubt. The judge delivered sentences that reflected the gravity of the crimes while staying within legal bounds. But for the survivors and families, no sentence could ever feel adequate. No punishment could ever match the crime. No amount of time in prison could balance the scales. The question of what justice looks like in cases like this is one that societies have grappled with for centuries. Is it punishment, rehabilitation, prevention, retribution? The answer depends on who you ask. For some, justice means ensuring the perpetrators suffer as their victims suffered. For others, it means ensuring they never have the opportunity to harm anyone again. For others still, it means creating systems that prevent such crimes from happening in the first place. The Bossaborn case achieved some of these goals. Wilfried and Angelika were removed from society. They cannot hurt anyone else, at least not in the same way. The investigation exposed flaws in missing person protocols and led to reforms. The publicity raised awareness about coercive control and domestic violence. These are not small things. They matter. but they do not resurrect the dead. They do not heal the survivors. They do not restore what was taken. If you've watched this entire story, thank you. Thank you for bearing witness. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring about victims whose names you may never fully know, whose faces you may never see, whose stories might otherwise be forgotten. Share this video if you believe these stories matter. Subscribe if you want to see more deeply researched content like this. And leave a comment sharing your thoughts. We read every single one, and your engagement helps us continue creating meaningful content. Evil exists. It always has. It always will. But so does resistance. So does justice. So does the human capacity to care, to fight, to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The Bossaborn case is a reminder of both, the depths to which humans can sink and the heights to which we can rise in response. The house is gone. The perpetrators are imprisoned. The victims are mourned. And we, the living, are left with the responsibility to learn, to remember, and to do better. Not because it will undo what happened, but because it might prevent what comes next.